This is TransportBT, a podcast of BT correspondents.
Welcome to TransportBT, a podcast of BT correspondents. I'm your host, correspondent Derryn Wong. Every week, my colleagues and I break down a business story that matters. Now, earlier in November, I was in Brunei for the Association of Asia Pacific Airlines 69th Assembly. It's an annual gathering of all the Asian aviation bigwigs in the region. I moderated a forum with the CEOs of Air Astana, Malaysia Airlines, Singapore Airlines, and Thai Airways. And it was supposed to be about the future of air travel in the region, but it didn't quite go that way because the CEOs had one thing they all wanted to talk about, or more accurately, complain about, and that's the supply chain. Now, the aviation supply chain has had major issues since COVID years and maybe even before, and airlines in the Asia-Pacific region are grounding planes and cutting flights due to delayed deliveries or defective parts from suppliers. We're going in-depth with this later, but it includes manufacturers like Airbus, Boeing, engine makers like GE Aerospace and Rolls-Royce and Pratt & Whitney, and thousands of others who make or procure every little thing that goes into the complex mechanical symphony that is a modern aircraft. But what exactly is the problem with the aviation supply chain, and why are airline CEOs so mad this time round? Today I have with me an aircraft manufacturer that isn't crazy late in deliveries, and one of their representatives is going to show us that it's not all gloom and doom, and in fact, Asia Pacific has plenty of new horizons to look out to. Today with me is Raul Villaron, the Senior Vice President and Head of Region for Asia Pacific at Embraer. Now, Embraer is, of course, the Brazilian aircraft manufacturer. Hey, Raul. How are you doing?
Hi, thank you for inviting. I'm excited to chat with you today.
Now, Embraer is not as well known as like the big boys, Airbus and Boeing. So could you tell us the concise history of the company?
Of course. Embraer is a 55-year-old company. We manufacture aircraft for defense, for business jets, and commercial aviation. Most big airlines in the world fly our airplanes like British Airways, American Airlines, Air France, KLM. Here in the region, we have Scoot, who just started flying, Japan Airlines, and many others.
And when we look at Embraer's history, was there any one product that really brought you guys to the big time, or was it a slow progression?
I would say that Embraer's secret sauce is really the engineering powerhouse. Embraer has thousands of engineers. Most of them have doctorates or PhDs. The company was actually created on the basis of a school.
Wow.
Initially, the government invested in a school, and its students developed the Bandeirante, our first aircraft, which was a turboprop 19-seater.
Wow.
That aircraft design was born before Embraer.
That sounds like what, the 50s or?
In 1969.
I see.
The project became Embraer, and the company grew under the government until 1994, when it was privatized, and then the company really grew with investment from public traded shares.
That's very good to know, I think, because I think all aircraft manufacturers should be engineering driven. I mean, we have seen what happens when engineers are no longer in charge with Boeing. But okay, to get back to the topic, so tell us a bit about what's going on in the supply chain. You know, why were the airline CEOs so angry, and why are the problems so big for aviation?
The genesis of the problem is every product is driven by supply and demand. And before the pandemic, there was a huge growth in production. So all big OEMs were ramping up very fast. And then the pandemic put a big pause on everything.
Mm-hmm.
And while you have big suppliers, you also have small suppliers that cannot handle this type
There are
of
thousands of
disruption.
them, right?
Thousands.
Wow, that's crazy.
And even the big suppliers, they have their own supplier.
Yeah, for sure.
So those smaller guys that cannot sustain such an impact like the pandemic, they take very long time to ramp up again. The OEMs, they need to find other suppliers to manufacture those items. You have delay over delay.
I see.
Then the pandemic finished, and there was a huge spike in travel, and airlines realized, I need capacity right now, and everybody wants capacity right now.
Mm-hmm.
And we have the problem growing and growing faster because more airlines want more aircraft and OEMs cannot deliver.
Right. And right now, the delivery time for like the big guys is like 5-6 years, right?
Yeah.
What is it for Embraer?
We have a lower lead time than Boeing and Airbus nowadays, about 2 years. So if an airline signs today, they might be able to get aircraft in end 2026 or 2027.
Less than half the time. That's not bad.
Which is much earlier. And that is putting us in the map of airlines that never considered our aircraft. Because we have a production that's smaller than Boeing and Airbus, we can't afford to overbook. So if we have a slot to be delivered in 2026, 2027, we will only sell one of those slots, right? So when you look at our deliveries, we have a much lower problem than we see on the competitor side.
So one thing I wanted to ask you, Raul, because, we're talking about Airbus and Boeing, and someone actually told me a lot of the major suppliers in aviation, actually, they're just 2 or 3 of them. And there's not many of them. That's part of the problem, right? Because it's so specialized that there aren't many guys who can give you what you need, right?
Yeah, you will see the biggest items you have in an aircraft: engine, APU, landing gear, wheels and brakes, right?
Sorry, what's an APU?
APU is in the back of the aircraft. You have this cone, and that generates power for the aircraft.
Ah, okay. Well, when you're not moving, right?
You can use when you're flying. You can use when you're on ground to generate power for air conditioning, for example.
Wow, okay. Yeah.
So those items are manufactured by few companies. And generally, those few companies supply to the same OEMs, Boeing, Airbus, Embraer.
Right.
What's different is the scale. While Embraer delivers 100 aircraft a year, Boeing and Airbus, they have a much bigger scale. So Embraer is now delivering, I would say, a delay that's acceptable comparing to what you can see on the competitor side.
I see. Because there are only a few suppliers, and it's also because aircraft are really complex as well, right? They're like, how many parts are there in a modern aircraft? 100,000, 200,000? I don't know.
It's just too many.
Just too many.
But I would say the biggest parts, like the engine, is the one that we have to really control to make sure that we have enough engines to deliver the number of aircraft we gave in our guidance.
So with all these problems and, their manpower problems, their material problems, it was such a huge disruption from COVID. Is there any way to fix it? Or is it going to be the case where we have these issues for the next 5 to 10 years at least?
I think the supply chain issue is improving quarter by quarter. Because of the size of the issue, maybe in the next 2 years, we will see the situation in a much better place.
Okay, cool. That sounds very cool because as we know, Asia Pacific is going to really take off in terms of aviation soon. But we're going to go for a short break. When we come back, the good horizons we have to look forward to in Asia.
BT Correspondence welcomes TransportBT, the newest member in the channel's lineup, providing in-depth commentary and a 360 view on all things transport. Join correspondent Derryn Wong as he explores the business of the sector and the policies that govern it. Hear from the industry leaders who will join him to provide context and insight. BT Correspondence, a new episode every Tuesday, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe and listen today to BT Correspondence.
And now, back to TransportBT, a podcast of BT Correspondence.
Okay, we're back with Raul Villaron, Senior Vice President and Head of Region for Asia Pacific at aircraft manufacturer Embraer. So let's get away from supply chain for a while. And I think our listeners might be more familiar with Embraer now that you guys are really coming into the region with Scoot. And how many aircraft was that again? And then how many more to come?
Scoot signed for 9. They took delivery of 4. The 5th one is coming in December. So that's good news for Singaporeans and people living here. I love that now I can fly to Koh Samui.
Koh Samui.
It's opening up Fukuoka as well. Those are 2 very nice destinations to go for vacation, right? They fly to 15 places with the E2 nowadays. Some are new markets, some are right sizing. We call right sizing when you have a bigger aircraft. And then either you don't have enough people to fly that big aircraft or you want to increase the number of flights you do on a weekly basis. So you right size, you have a smaller airplane, you fly more. or you fly the same number of flights and you increase the load factor of the aircraft, meaning you make more money, right? Yep. So for Scoot, they are flying to Krabi, for example, now 10 times a week. Before they used to fly 7 times a week.
Okay.
And you are opening new markets, Koh Samui, Fukuoka, Cebu, and Sarawak, many destinations in 5 or 6 different countries, which is interesting for us as a manufacturer as well, because when you fly to Indonesia, all the airlines that are from that market will look at that aircraft and think, maybe that's an interesting aircraft. Let me look at it.
Yeah. So it sounds like the regional business flying from within Asia is becoming more popular as well.
I would say that the E2 helps to build up this regional connectivity, but also helps Singapore Airlines to increase their connectivity to the globe.
Right.
So when they fly to Koh Samui, they also fly people from Australia to stop in Singapore and then go to Koh Samui.
Because it's a regional hub, right? Yeah.
It's a hub. Yeah. So in the end, it's beneficial for Scoot because it's expanding its wings in the region, but it's highly beneficial to Singapore Airlines because it's giving more destinations to their wide-body flights as well.
Okay. For listeners who don't know, Singapore Airlines is the parent company that owns Scoot. And wide-body means the 2-aisle intercontinental big jets, right?
That's correct, yeah.
And Raul, I looked at the E2 earlier this year when you unveiled it, Scoot unveiled it at Changi, and I noticed that for a short-haul aircraft, it actually has 2 seats per row. And you only have 1 aisle, but you have 2 seats per row. And I think that's really great for a paru jumper, so to speak. You have to elbow people on your left and right.
Yeah. So this is one of the biggest selling points of the E2 jets, right? You don't have a middle seat. So either you have an aisle or you have a window. Each person prefers either one, but they certainly don't like a middle seat, right?
I can't stand middle seats. I'm a bit claustrophobic. Yeah. Okay. So in general, Asia Pacific is now the biggest aviation market in the world. More than a third of airline passenger travel happens in Asia Pacific. Where do you think it's going for the next 5 years and beyond? Because the forecasts are really bullish, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting to bring the perspective of Embraer, right?
Yeah.
We have always been very successful in US, Europe, with all the big airlines, as I mentioned before. And Asia has been a tough market for us to break. And the main reason for that is that Asia has always been driven by low-cost carriers. What happened is the previous product of Embraer was on a per-seat basis expensive.
Right.
The new product we have, which is the E2, it has the similar seat cost as a bigger plane, but a much lower trip cost than a A320 or a 737.
But how did you guys achieve that?
Because while our competitors only did a re-engine on their aircraft, we actually completely changed our aircraft with a new landing gear, new fly-by-wire, new wings, new engines. And we also increased a little bit the size of our aircraft so that you can get up to 146 seats. And then low-cost carriers started looking at our planes.
Right.
The other interesting thing is that the business model of a low-cost carrier was always believed to be the best if it's a single fleet type airline.
Because it's easier to maintain, so to speak?
Yeah, because when you only have one type, you only need spare parts for that type. You only need pilots for that.
Simpler supply chain.
Simple. The issue with simple is that when you have big drops in demand, you have a big plane you cannot fill.
Overcapacity, right?
Overcapacity. If you have one fleet type and that fleet type is grounded, you have no revenue. So it's very risky. And the pandemic also changed a little bit the way people fly. Now with working from home, people want to live in smaller cities where you don't have traffic jam to go to work. You have a better life. So that means that you need more connectivity to smaller places, not to the big places. Right. The other important change was inflation. Inflation tends to get the people with lower income because they have less disposable income to fly, right? Flying is not a necessity. So low-cost carriers are the ones suffering more when you look at profitability. So we see now more and more low-cost carriers moving to a dual fleet strategy.
Right. Interesting.
Where they can be more flexible and adapt to those market changes.
Okay, cool. Do you have any more views on the really wide outlook for Asia Pacific? How much do you think it'll grow? Or
Well, for us, India is growing very fast. It's probably the fastest growing market in Asia. We have a customer there that's growing fast, Star Air. They just announced that they will grow their fleet to 25 aircraft, and they fly all Embraer fleet, which is exciting. Southeast Asia, we have the example of Scoot doing a lot with our planes. So we believe we could penetrate that market because Scoot will stimulate other airlines to look at our planes. Indonesia, for example, it's a very large country, island, 70,000 islands, and they need connectivity by air. So smaller aircraft will really play a big role for connectivity there.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much for your time, Raul, and your input. That was Raul Villaron, who's with Embraer in the Asia-Pacific region. Next week, BT Correspondents will be back again for another episode, so please continue to be a pod person, and check it out. As a transport podcast, we aim to cover anything that drives, flies, swims, or maybe even rockets through space next time. If you have any thoughts or questions or suggestions about the show, please email us at btpodcasts, that's btpodcasts at sph.com.sg. I'm Derryn Wong. Thank you for listening.
This is a podcast by the Business Times. Find more BT podcasts at businesstimes.com.sg/podcasts. Or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is meant to provide general information only. SPH Media accepts no liability for loss arising from any reliance on the podcast or use of third parties' products and services. Please consult professional advisors for independent advice.